Hello, this is now Mimi John, Senior Editor of Building Operating Management Magazine. Thank you for attending today's webcast, How Building Automation Enhances Security. Our presenter is Stephen Turney, Offer Management at Schneider Electric. Stephen has worked at Schneider Electric for 20 years, helping customers and consultants develop solutions to address security concerns and mitigate risks. He has also worked in product development with a focus on end-user solutions and has developed sales support tools to help build successful organizations. Stephen is an accomplished speaker and presenter, having led lectures, panel presentations, and workshops at events such as ISE West, ASHI conferences, the Campus Security Conference, and more. Today's learning objectives include understand the benefits of a holistically integrated building which encompasses security and traditional building management, identify areas of concern within a facility and enable staff with greater efficiency, and understand how data from security systems can be beneficial to overall facility operations. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few details about today's event. A live question and answer session will follow today's presentation. To submit questions, please use the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen and send your questions to all panelists. Our presenter will answer as many questions as time permits. At the conclusion of today's webcast, you will receive a PDF copy of today's presentation slides. You will also receive a link to a brief online assessment. Upon successful completion of this assessment, you will receive your CEU certificate. Today's webcast will also be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcast. And now, a brief word from our sponsor.
Schneider Electric is leading the digital transformation of energy management and automation in homes, buildings, data centers, infrastructure, and industry. With global presence in over 100 countries, Schneider is the undisputable leader in power management, medium voltage, low voltage, and secure power, and in automation systems. We provide integrated efficiency solutions combining energy, automation, and software. At Schneider Electric, life is on everywhere, for everyone, and at every moment.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Well, thanks, Naomi, for kicking it off, and appreciate everyone joining in for the discussion today. I thought I'd start off with kind of a little bit of a housekeeping thing, if you will, and just let you kind of know what we're here to talk about. So we're going to discuss how building management systems can be used to enhance security at the facilities that we all go in and out of today, provide better access for managers and streamline operations, improve data flow, if you will. And some of the things that we're going to touch on is the integration of facility management, energy, electrical, and IT infrastructure, and, of course, how this relates into the security side, which we're all accustomed to. We're going to explain how various building technologies and sensors and devices can be used to deliver data to apps and analytical tools and provide information to building owners to make them, again, more efficient, increasing the values of their assets. So I'm going to hope you all have fun today and learn something, and we'll get started. So we kick things off and look at it this way. Today's buildings and operators, they need to improve the efficiencies with a goal to improve the value of the asset. And in this case, when I say the value of the asset, I'm referring to the physical building itself. Think of it as a commercial office building that some of you all probably sit in or maybe own or operate. The value is important. It's also improved by being efficient. And also by being efficient, it helps attract and maintain occupants and tenants. It also improves customer satisfaction scores. And that's a real important to those out there that are operating healthcare facilities that we'll touch on a little bit as well. From the business continuity's perspective, disruptions to business operation is very important for building owners and operators. Continuity can improve and also negatively impact the value of the asset. But more importantly, the act can hinder and disrupt the operations of the building. I think all of us out there know at the end of the day, it's really important also to try to be as efficient as possible from an operating costs. I mean, we've talked about the efficiency term a few times already, but from staff perspective sometimes as well comes into play. But it's also really important to look at the total cost of ownership whenever you're running a facility. Helping reduce the ongoing expenses can be a cornerstone for a smart building or a holistically integrated building, if you will. And, I've been asked before, can we get to a net zero building? The simple answer is yes. Does it have to look bland? Nope, sure as heck does not. And in fact, in some cases, these highly efficient buildings look much more attractive than traditional facilities. And then can we do it in a commercial environment? And the answer is yes. And there's countless examples out there on the internet if you just Google it, or feel free to chime in with a question later on if you want to know more. At the end of the day, the other pillar that we've got here, we talk about cybersecurity. I don't think anybody on this call wants to get themselves nor one of their customers in the news in a negative way with regards to a cyber attack or a hack. So it's near and dear and should be close to heart to all of us as we work with customers and clients and helping them achieve some of these integrated buildings. So a lot of nice little numbers with some X's and percents at the end of them, right? Well, we are becoming a highly more consumer of electricity. In the past 10 years, between digital devices and digitization, energy consumption continues to grow, right? It has grown exponentially, but it continues to grow. And you can see there by 2040, it'll be growing 2 times faster than the current demands. If you look at the number of connected devices, if you will, the digitization of what we do, 10 times more growth in this area. And I can speak for myself. I've got a cell phone, I've got a tablet, I've got a Windows Surface, and I would actually challenge everybody that's listening here, when you get home, just sit back and ponder how many things in your house are connected. Those things are driving a lot of this electrical demand as well. And these also become very important tools when we get into the commercial buildings and the tenant spaces and what you can and cannot do. As I said, the building is becoming more digital. We need to take better control of this environment. And at the end of the day, drive some efficiencies into those facilities. Oops. There it goes. Sorry, it wasn't advancing. My mistake. I hit the wrong button. So let's talk about the converged building. What does it look like? What's included in it? And here I've got a representation of briefly what it can look like. This is absolutely by no means the only things that have to go into this discussion. But if you look at the bottom of the tech stack, you're going to see the field devices. Field devices, those are the things that some people will sit there and call them unintelligent devices. And by saying this, I do not mean that they're dumb. It just means that at the end of the day, they ultimately need to interact with some other thing in the building to truly function and deliver data. Anyone knows that you can deliver intelligence at something like a camera, or perhaps even a thermostat could be delivering data and information. But even those two examples, they rely upon something higher up the food chain, if you will, to actually fully function, communicate, as well as operate. That middle layer there, you see the command and control layer. This is the typical software applications, front-end systems, if you will. These are where the customers and operators of the facilities typically spend most of their time interacting with their buildings. In many cases, these are siloed, each serving themselves and their own applications. And in today's world, we use a variety of drivers and protocols that we're going to talk about in the use case discussions to make these things come together holistically. But again, here at this command and control, each individual system is in fact siloed. Sometimes this is good, and sometimes it's bad. The key is that they can also operate independently if need be. And then you look at the higher level of the architecture there, the higher level of the tech stack. This is where we get into the apps and services, as well as the analytical tools. At this level, we tended to see more of the harvesting of the information from the siloed systems. This does help people be more efficient and comfortable. The reason we can do this, or it can be done this way, is the comfort level comes by allowing those analytical tools to make some decisions for the building owners and operators, as opposed to making those systems reliant upon those building operators and owners to make decisions. It is empowering to the customers as well. Again, I can make, or you can make a building talk much about what it's doing, make decisions, change set points and things like that, and then just simply notify the building owner or building manager that something has changed. At the end of the day, too, in this area, when we get into the analytical tools and the mobile apps, the key point is to be as efficient, make it simple, and make it very intuitive. So right now we're going to get into a couple of use case examples, and I'm going to start off with the most basic one that we typically see, and I'm hopefully speaking to the choir here, if you will, for the attendees. Something really simple: security integration with video surveillance. Okay. So you see the little screenshot there. An event has happened. It's popped up the video for the operator. It's telling the operator what's going on or what had gone on. It's giving them that view of the world right then at that moment in time, but you can also scrub left and right to go backwards and forwards to see the pre- and post-recording. At the end of the day, the goal here, the benefits here, expand the visibility, streamline the operations. It does help reduce operating and maintenance costs as well as installation because you're not having to deploy multiple platforms. But also, one thing that some people tend to forget is those security cameras that we all have in our facilities. They can actually be used for a lot more than just surveillance. The analytical tools within those cameras can be used to detect intrusion, can be used to detect occupancy, as well as tracing or tracking people left to right, if you will. And this information can be served upstream to that command and control layer, as well as to the apps and analytical data level. How do we do it? Simple SDK type developments. Can also use a little bit of web services in this environment, but it also delivers a very key flow of information to those operators. So next, we're going to get a little bit more complicated, not too much at this point, but we're talking about security integration to lighting as well as building management systems. Here the goal, the benefits, we want to reduce the energy consumption by the tenants, only heat and cool areas where people are located, and also provide a backup to the security teams. So at this point, what we're doing is we're delivering security events, which again are typically siloed within that security application. We're sharing those events and those alarms to the building management system so that the facilities team can in a sense become a backup to the security team if needed. From an efficiencies perspective, whenever a tenant comes in the facility, the first one of the day, this is when you start to activate air, you start to activate the lights, again, being as energy positive, postured as you possibly can. But the other thing from an analyticals perspective is if you know that the tenant shows up 7:50 every morning, that's the first person that comes in, we can use that data to predictively start to cool the space or pre-cool the space an hour ahead of time or maybe 45 minutes ahead of time, whatever the case might be. You take the security side, you drive this integration to the lighting. In this area, we do reduce the energy consumption because, again, we only want to activate and enable lights when they're needed and where they're needed. Again, if there's nobody in the area, there's no reason to light it up. It also does help reduce in the light pollution by only activating lights during an alarm after hours or whenever the building's not occupied. And if you're not familiar with the term lighting pollution, by this I mean if you You look at a parking lot as an example in the middle of the night, and there's no cars there, but all the lights in the parking lot might be on. This is generating a halo that can be considered pollution to the neighboring residential areas. And it's an interesting little tidbit, and I understand it's a pretty wide spread here. The 15 to 27% of funding or building operating expenses go into lighting those facilities. And just so you know, the spread there, that 15 to 27, is because this survey that was done by ASI and stuff spanned multiple types of buildings, hospitals, residential condominium-type facilities, as well as commercial office buildings. At the end of the day, the goal here, reduce operating expenses, deliver some better value to the customers as well. And then you can see the how. Typical protocols in this world exist. Industry standard, so Modbus and BACnet. You can build connectors, as well as, again, doing this through the development between two products, APIs or SDKs. But in this, we're starting to see a lot more trend in the Modbus as well as the BACnet side. So step up a little bit more here. Talk about building automation, electrical, and utility metering. In this, things like demand limiting and load shedding come into play. We can actually monitor the electric meters for current draw for high consumption equipment. And as we see that demand from that equipment start to shed off, we can relax these set points. Set points being temperature points as well as lighting levels. And this does help reduce consumption, which again helps in that efficiency conversation. We can also reduce equipment load based upon peak utility rates. Okay? And this also helps from a maintenance perspective, because if you're not making that equipment operate at full capacity, you're also not overburdening things like bearings within that equipment. And then you can also let the system, again, from an analytical perspective, make some decisions. If you deem a device or a system or a light or a piece of equipment as non-critical, as that peak demand starts to hit from a utility charges perspective, the analytical side of these systems can start to shed back, turn off as needed. Tying this back into the security side, as soon as there's a security event, obviously we can bring that equipment, in this example I'm suggesting lights, can be automated to come back on. This area here is also a key one from a first responder's perspective. I hope I speak for everyone that's listening, that if you happen to be a first responder stepping foot into a building where an alarm had been reported, you definitely don't want to walk into a dark building. We can also drive value to those first responders by only lighting up the areas affected by those events or those security breaches. This also helps those individuals and those teams as they're approaching the building to know exactly where to go. Commercially, at this point in time, too, with the monitoring of the meters, we can produce energy consumption reports. Certain commercial office environments will use this for revenue generation purposes with tenants that are consuming more than they are allotted or even working weekends and late nights. So again, this is a revenue generation as well as a cost avoidance part of the discussion. And just like the use case, the scenario that we spoke about a second ago or a moment ago, typical protocols, BACnet, Modbus, smart connectors, as well as doing API type integration or SDK type integrations. And then specifically just getting into security controls with lighting. Very similar to the previous conversation, but in this, we're going to factor in things like sunrise, sunset, time changes. So the typical scenario here is, again, going back to the signs or the parking lot examples, since the time changes throughout the course of the year, we obviously, within those lighting systems, can fluctuate and automatically change when these lights come on and off. But however, when you've tied this to a security system, letting its time change also take effect and impact that lighting control system. And by this, I mean, if time changes by an hour, there's no reason to continue to send those security events during that hour. Let those events communicate only to the lighting control system based upon the new time, especially from a daylight savings times perspective. And again, at any time in this scenario when you're light shedding, we still allow those security events to take action, take control, interact with the lighting system, override it when they've done setbacks and turn-offs to light up those areas for those first responders. And also, by the way, lighting is a very good deterrent of crime. Again, it goes back to the cost avoidance, can be deemed as a little of a revenue generator. And then the protocols and such you see there, very similar to the last two conversations. So now let's look at a little bit of the reverse. I want to take some building management stuff and I want to put it into security. The example that I've got here in a picture, rooftop unit, equipment room. I've got some louvers, some vents, if you will, feeding clean air into that equipment room. These louvers, these vents, tend to have position switches on them. So that way, from a maintenance perspective, you know if they're open or closed. Safety as well comes into play in that. Very good information, though, can be delivered to security because these blue vents, these louvers, if you will, can become a point of entry into the facility in some cases. So if these are ever opened up, it's a good idea to let that information be shared back to security so they can monitor and alert. And if that ever happens in an after-hours situation or an after-hours scenario, security can respond because it might be a break-in. If you look at it from a maintenance perspective, if you will, this type of integration, this type of automation, if you know that maintenance is going to show up on Friday between the hours of 8 and 12 to do work in this area, let your maintenance systems go ahead and share that information with the security platform. And we can change and adjust access levels. So that way, when that maintenance person gets to that door, they hit the card reader with his or her badge, it'll automatically let them in the door. There's no reason, no need to interact with the facilities team or the security team other than a simple check-in and check-out. So that way that the building operators know that the people have gotten there or left. The key feature here is the increased awareness, a little bit of simplification of their day-to-day operations. And again, very similar process on the how here. Hopefully you see this as a reoccurring theme. BACnet, Modbus, smart connectors, and then API, SDK type connections. And I got to touch on a little bit for healthcare here. Little bit of a different area. And some of these are very simple and things that we do normally, especially in the infant protection side. But something that tends to get forgotten is the satisfaction of these patients and the positive impact that it can have on hospital healthcare providers' net promoter scores. So doing simple things, like giving the patient the ability to adjust the temperature in his or her room, simply from a pillow speaker. Don't even have to make a phone call. You don't have to wait for a family member to walk in the door and hit the button on the thermostat on the wall. Enable them to do it right there from their pillow speaker. And a term that we don't talk about much, especially in this space, but I really hope that we start to, is the concept of responding in kind. Typically, security responders are looked at brute force or looked as brute force responders. That's not always the case, and especially within a healthcare environment. If there happens to be like a code blue situation with a patient, and while the medical practitioners are rushing to take care of that patient, the family members can get a little concerned and frantic and hysterical in some cases. And the concept of responding in kind is simply to sit there and have security show up to act in kind and stand between the family members and the healthcare providers. The infant protection, again, this is something that we commonly do all the time. But the two bottom bullet points are things that typically may not get discussed: bringing the lights to 100%, and then security alert notifications, both visual, text, and or email based. And one of the things that you're starting to hear about and see a little bit more today in this regard is driving that visualization to existing devices within the facility. By that, what do I mean? Perhaps the dome light outside of the room of the patient. The card readers within the area, every one of them has an LED light. Taking control of that LED light during this type of a situation and having it flash specific color sequences, so that way, again, security teams, first responders, NICU staff and such, they know what's going on. Again, this is an example of where we're trying to increase satisfaction, also increase efficiency a little bit, but also enhance security and as well as awareness. If you look at that top layer and the harvesting of the information, what do we do with it? From an equipment's perspective, we analyze the points on mechanical systems. We can also do the trending on the door systems, the door that are controlled by security for access control purposes. Can drive preventative maintenance measures. As an example, facilities might be aware that every 30,000 cycles of a door, the pneumatic door closer might need to be maintained or have a maintenance done on it, preventative maintenance schedule done on it. Well, we can report that within security, share it upstream to the command and control level as well as the analytical side, feed that data over to the maintenance system, and generate work orders. This analysis also lets us monitor for areas of building where you're heating and cooling at the same time, which again is hindering efficiency within a facility. From a system analytics perspective, we take those systems as well as the subsystems. We can look at things like memory consumption, communication failure logs, monitor system storage, especially in a video platform, helps maintain systems or keep them operating as optimal as possible. And again, in this analytical side, sharing this information upstream to the analytical system so that we can generate work orders automated. From an occupant's perspective, you can monitor the flow of people within a building to help manage things like lighting. When do you need to increase or decrease heat and cooling? Manage your hot and cold calls. Optimize the space utilization. Again, if you've got a lease space on the floor that's unoccupied, there's no reason to be heating and cooling it is to the same levels as the other parts of the facility. In this case, we're going to help reduce utility costs and continue to improve occupant satisfaction scores, especially in consideration of hot-cold calls. Be remiss if I didn't give some kind of a digital representation of what it can look like. This is a dashboard view, if you will, and I'm sorry it's a little bit gray or fuzzy here. But in this regard, we're pulling data together, giving customers a weather dashboard, security door usage, given the ability to lock down, unlock doors in buildings, or in the building, I'm sorry. Your event windows across the building have mixed alerts. This is coming from the automation, lighting, as well as security. Looking at the occupancy load for the facility, what parts of the building are heavily occupied right now? This data side is easily accessed. The representation of it is very fluid and very, very intuitive. It allows operators to take action. And then you can start to trend this data for tomorrow. And by that, what do I mean? Historical trends will be predictive of what the future will look like. So if I know on every October 15th, I'm going to have a spike in the number of occupants in the second floor of the facility, type of an event, I can go ahead and let the systems, the analytical tools that I have at my hand or at my disposal, preset and pre-adjust those set points to better plan for those occupancy loads. this in here. We've touched on several of these, the Modbus BACnet side. But as we get more digital and we get more tool sets into the facilities that we all sit in today, additional things come into play, like web services, which I hadn't touched on much. We go more IoT-based and IP infrastructure-based. These newer technologies, these newer protocols, if you will, enable the sharing and the harvesting of this information easier than it could ever be done before. And you can also take these things and beyond what we've talked about. Fire alarm integration can come into play here as well as a secondary means of integration to drive more data as well as data for responders. So with that, Naomi, I think we would be ready for questions.
Perfect. Stephen, thank you so much. This has been a great presentation. I just want to remind everyone that you can use that panel on the right-hand side of your screen to submit your questions, and we will be getting to as many questions as we can. To begin with this conversation, you started talking about this at the very end with the Internet of Things. Early in your presentation, you had mentioned the stack of equipment that might be in a facility, and that very lower level is the sensors and whatever are not necessarily smart. It made me wonder, how is Internet of Things kind of impacting that?
Oh, dramatically. So what we're seeing more is an interest at that field device layer, those things being IP enabled, and essentially building in the technology so those field level devices, once IP enabled, are bypassing that command and control layer and delivering data directly to the top layer, analytics, apps, and such. You really see this within the security space. IP readers, obviously IP cameras have been out for decades or eons, if you will. And you're seeing this more within the valves and actuator space for building automation systems as well. Right.
Yeah, that whole thing is just kind of exploding. We have one question that came in, and I'm just going to read it. The question is the platform already packed to go with little tweaks based on sites such as wiring, design, access points, or do I have to base my design on your platform?
Okay. That's a very good question. And the answer is a yes and a no, actually. The good thing about the industry from a building management, building automations perspective is these protocols are standards. So BACnet, Modbus, LAN, things like this. So as long as the two systems have the ability to communicate via one of these open protocols, you can mix and match platforms from different vendors. The other side of it is, no. Sometimes there's a benefit and the customer wants to have a single platform that does all. And again, we would be utilizing some of the same protocols, BACnet, Modbus, LAN, smart connectors, APIs. At the end of the day, it's what's best for the customer and what platforms they're comfortable with. So that's step one. Step two is once that decision has been made from a comfort levels perspective with a technology or a product, is to ensure that those platforms can communicate using one of the methods that we talked about. Again, Modbus, BACnet, LAN, smart connectors, things like that, or web services.
Okay. Excellent. One question that I have as well is, you mentioned a wide variety of ways that building automation can be used to enhance security in a wide variety of settings. And it made me wonder, the capability is there, but how much of the market has adopted these strategies, or is this still kind of a cutting edge? Like, what is the state of the industry right now as far as adoption and people's, any hurdles that they might have?
We're seeing more of a trend and more of an interest in it, especially in these new construction projects. Mm-hmm. From a retrofits perspective, sometimes it can be hard to do this because you're dealing with legacy systems that may or may not have the ability to share information. I think you noted in the beginning, I've been here for 20 years, and within our go-to-market strategies, we've done the security, lighting, and automation native integration since I've been here. Mm-hmm. And in the last 5 years, you see more discussions about smart buildings, smart cities, specifically in the smart buildings space, is where we're seeing more and more interest in this. Mm-hmm. Again, it's more new construction driven because it's easier to get it done while the building's being built. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen any interest or drive for this from the insurance side? Because like when you were talking about the lighting system being able to, in a security event, highlight the areas that are, being affected and stuff, that all seems like it would be of interest to insurance companies. Has there been any kind of, conversation around that, like insurance companies talking to their constituents like, hey, this is a good idea, you really should be doing this?
That's an interesting one I hadn't thought about. I can share it hasn't specifically come up in any discussions that I've been in. Mm-hmm. However, now that you put that on the proverbial table, I will definitely be bringing that up because it is something that's a positive. Now, where I have brought this up is with city planners.
Okay.
From an ordinance perspective, is as you are building these new buildings, build these type of solutions or technologies and these types of integrations in, not by product name, again, just functional use cases, if you will, specifically targeting the benefit that it brings to the first responders. I have had the conversation in that context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. So with one question that I always kind of wonder about is as these buildings become more and more intelligent and we're gathering more and more data, how is all of that being facilitated? I know, as bandwidth increases and speeds increase, that's a requirement. Like, what are the things that are coming? I guess I'm trying to formulate a question around, like, what are the advances that are happening right now that are making this kind of possible beyond what's happening inside the building infrastructure?
Sure. So aside from your typical wired type network, your wired access points are coming into play more as gathering points for some of these devices and sensors that feed it back into the command and control layer, then upstream to apps analytics. The other big enabler of this, though, is the cloud. You touched on something very key. When you start looking at these intelligent smart buildings, the sheer amount of data that can exist and can be harvested can consume a lot of storage, not necessarily bandwidth. The key concern long-term turns out to be storage. Bringing in the cloud technologies where you've got not only a redundancy from that data set's perspective as far as where it's stored, but also how much you can capture and store, and then finally how much of it can be processed. That's another big enabler of this analytical side to the holistic integration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, a question just came in about kind of speaking to that, enabling that data gathering in the retrofit example. So the question is, in older buildings, does all the equipment that is desired to be monitored have to be changed out for the system, or are there small devices with Wi-Fi that you can interconnect to the old equipment to be monitored? So how do you start that retrofit conversation?
Yeah, the first part of the conversation starts out by looking at what you've got and what your goal is to try to achieve. And in this conversation, or at this point in the conversation, completely ignoring the would it have to be replaced or could it be used conversation. Just truly trying to understand the goals that that particular building owner operator is trying to achieve. After that's been achieved, you do take a look at the technologies, the products, the systems they might have. Understand then what and how it can share data and communicate. And then, hopefully, that existing system can share information in one of the common means. If not, you can put in secondary sensors that would serve up that data. But some people shy away from that because essentially you're putting in two sensors, if you will, that are serving the same purpose.
Okay. And it just becomes, in the retrofit, it is just so tricky, all the different factors that you have to balance. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if so one last question that I wanted to ask you. So you threw out some ideas of how this technology works in the world. Do you have any examples? Before I ask my question, there's one question that came in. How does the cybersecurity platform fit in? Are there general practices in place that can be specified?
Ooh, good one. That touches on that fourth pillar, if you will. Yes, they are very important, and they are backed in. What we end up doing is looking for encryption methodologies that can be used, common encryption methodologies, to share this data not only upstream, but peer-to-peer within that command and control layer. So things like TLS encryption, TLS 1.2 comes to mind, and as well as AES on the data side. Obviously, password protection, single sign-on, protection of the login processes as well as the data once logged in. User rights, user permissions come into play as well here. Only allow certain people to see what they need to see. So that's a key aspect of data, or the cybersecurity side too. Like here, Schneider, for example, how we handle people's computers is addressed within our cybersecurity rules. Not just how our networks and our computers talk and sit on that network, but how we use them ourselves is a part of that, is a key piece. The other side that comes into play in this is there are use case examples where you can take cybersecurity breaches, repeated breaches, become security notifications, security alerts, and then you're sharing that data with the IT teams so that they can take a look and see what's going on, see where these hack points or potential hack points, where these vulnerabilities might be.
Okay, excellent. Well, I had one question that you talked about the different scenarios where this automation and security interface could happen, and I was wondering if you could speak to any kind of cool, specific example that would illustrate for the audience, maybe one of your favorite examples of this concept being utilized.
Sure. So, there's a building out there called the Edge. It's in Amsterdam, and it is touted as the world's most efficient commercial office building, something to the tune of 98.4, or maybe it's 98.6%, but nonetheless, it is a very efficient building. It's a very good example of how these systems can be brought together, especially when you start talking about the mobile apps. In the case of the Edge building, there's a video out there actually on YouTube on it, but they use apps to turn on and turn off lights where they sit. They also use apps, the building management app, to see what's going on in the cafeteria for lunch. So it's a pretty cool example, and it's Bloomberg put it out about a year ago, I think it was.
Okay.
And anyone can just Google it, and it's out there to watch the video.
The Edge. I wonder when when will that kind of stuff come to our shores, I wonder. Soon.
There's examples. Yeah, soon to a building near you.
Very cool. Well, Stephen, thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation. I think we all learned a lot. Thank you to the audience for sending in your great questions, and also thanks to our sponsor. So with that, we're going to wrap up the webcast.